Welcome to Ray-ality TV. I'm Raymond Bakari. This episode is continuing my coverage of the growing field of candidates running in Rhode Island's first congressional district special election to replace former Congressman David Cicilline. One of the candidates that are joining me today is Paul LeBon. Paul, how are you today?
Very good, thank you.
Thank you for coming on. It's a pleasure to have you on the show. Why do you want to represent Rhode Island? Why do you want to represent Rhode Island in Congress?
Well, I looked over the 15 candidates who had filed ahead of me, and everyone is talking about, vague national issues, abortion rights, gay rights, saving our democracy, saving our liberties, prescription drugs, gun control. One person can't affect any of those. And the fact that you're replacing David Cicilline, the needle's not going to move at all because you're basically replacing, his feelings. My whole position, my whole campaign is about bringing jobs. I have 30 years experience working with Fortune 500 companies, and my whole campaign is about bringing good quality paying jobs to Rhode Island. I've got four major items in my platform, and that's what I want to pursue.
Before we dive into the parts of your platform and some of those national issues you had mentioned at the top of the answer, I do want to ask how you differentiate from the candidates, because there are about, I think, 16 now at this point.
Well, because they're all talking about blah, 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 and I'm talking about bringing jobs to Rhode Island. That's the biggest differentiator.
Aside from policy, there's also going to be ideological differences. For example, some candidates are more progressive, some are more on the moderate side. Where would you stand in that spectrum of political ideologies?
I'm more, I'm more moderate. I'm not more moderate. I'm moderate. I mean, I don't. The progressive is just a way too off for me.
Now, looking at some of the policy goals you want to implement, one of your primary areas of focus, as emphasized on your website, is jobs. You want to secure a $3 billion CHIPS Act grant to get a chips factory here in Rhode Island. Can you go a little more in depth on that plan and why you think it's beneficial for the state?
Sure. The CHIPS Act was signed by President Biden last summer, and it allocates $39 billion to be doled out in $3 billion increments to microchip manufacturers to bring and build their chip plants, or what are known as fabs, to build their chip fabs here in the United States. Gina Raimondo, the Commerce Secretary, holds the purse strings to that money. She's awarded $3 billion to Intel, who are building a $20 billion plant in Ohio. She's awarded $3 billion to Apple, who are building out in Arizona. So I believe that, again, it's her home state. She should look for us. The plant that's being built in Ohio right now, they have 7,000 construction jobs, and when it's completed, there'll be 3,000 tech jobs paying $130,000 a year. Now, when you look at the state of Rhode Island, you say, well, where do we have that kind of acreage to build something like that? I look at the Quonset State Airport, which basically, it's an old military facility that was never, totally decommissioned. And we have 3 other airports in the state. So, there's a few military aircraft parked there. There's a private FBO. Relocate those to the other 2 airports. You've got 750 acres where you could build a $10+ billion chips plant. It's on the water. Chip manufacturers need a ton of water. The plant in Ohio was being built on Lake Erie. Here, they could build it. They have the water right there in Narragansett Bay. They could use a desalinization process to take care of their plant. Desalinization plants use a lot of electricity. They could have a wind farm. Secondly, desalinization plants, they emit brine. And normally it's dumped back into the ocean. That's why they don't have the plants here in the U.S. But brine is what cities and towns and states use to pre-treat roads in winter storms. So they could, recycle that to various communities.
And with this kind of proposal, as you know how politics go in D.C., you're likely going to have to build some relationships, especially since it's a GOP-led House. But you also have some of Rhode Island's delegation, like Senator Reed, who brings home the bacon every year. Do you have any plans on how you would go about getting this grant secured with a vote or something along those lines?
Yes, it's very simple. Go visit Gina Raimondo at the Commerce Department and say, Madam Secretary, please bring one of these plants to your home state. It's already been approved. It's already been passed by Congress. Right now, there are 400 companies that have applied to get those $3 billion grants, and there are only 11 of them left. So, she could certainly direct one of the companies and say, hey, here you go, but please go build your plant in my home state.
And that's just one of a couple proposals you have on your website that are very, vision oriented and have a lot of merit to it. Another one that you brought up, which I found interesting, was replacing the Providence Place Mall with the VA Medical Center Annex. Can you talk a little bit more about that proposal as well?
Yes, malls all over the country, as we all know, are dying. They're being converted to everything from churches to indoor, driving tracks to, whatever kind of facilities. If Providence Place goes, the last thing we need in Providence is more upscale housing. I shared with Senator Reed, who thought it was a great idea. I also shared with Director O'Connell at the VA hospital. I think if they converted that, Senator Reed is on the every committee that controls the money. If he could acquire that Providence Place Mall for the VA and convert it into a VA annex, the VA hospital up on Chalkstone Avenue is chock full, and they're getting more and more veterans with the Middle East wars. They're going to have more veterans to serve. That would bring, again, lots of construction jobs. Then it would bring lots of healthcare jobs, and it would be a 24/7 by 365 operation. So it would help the local economy. I mean, as I like to joke, Haven Brothers might have to open a second location because the healthcare workers would be going out to eat in the middle of the night.
And currently, I believe the Providence Place Mall are trying to get another tax break for another long period of time. Have you talked to anybody on the city council or even Mayor Brett Smiley about this idea?
I shared the idea with Mayor Smiley. I shared several. I've written over 20 white papers since I've been back here in Rhode Island about housing, about economic development, about public safety. I've shared them with several of the mayors. I shared the idea with Mayor Smiley actually when he was on Gene Valicenti's show on WPRO, and when I spoke to him at Senator Reed's breakfast, he said he thought that was a pretty neat idea, were his words.
And if it weren't able to get into Providence, could you see any other location for something like this? That's that building that you're thinking about?
Well, which one? The CHIPS or the VA?
The VA.
Well, again, I mean, you've got this large, beautiful, solid building. It's right down the street. It's got plenty of parking. It makes sense. If you're going to look at how would we repurpose this building? Well, we can put in housing. Well, we don't need more upscale, expensive housing in downtown Providence. I guess we could convert it to a school, maybe a high school, whatever. Well, that's not going to help the local economy. In terms of what could help the local economy, in my estimation, again, with my, my background, my experience, obviously a VA hospital is a government facility, but it pumps a lot of money into the economy, salaries and plus all the ancillary, products and services, and the economy being supported by the staff and the visitors.
I have want to move on to some of those other topics that are not really geared toward your platform, but are definitely talked about in this primary by a lot of the candidates. One of them is addressing gun violence, which is a big topic right now in national and even local politics. Where do you stand on the big ticket item, the national assault weapons ban?
Well, I lived in Texas the last 30 years. I've been to 2 prayer vigils at church shootings, Sutherland Springs and Westgate Church of Christ. When you're there, when you're visiting with the families, with the survivors of the victims, with the survivors, and with the first responders, looking into their eyes and seeing the pain, I totally am in support of an assault weapons ban. And Texas, of course, is crazy. The town that I lived in, some of the gun enthusiasts, every Saturday would come out and they would just walk around the town common with automatic rifles strapped on their shoulders. We need to put an end to weapons of war being available for people on the street.
There are also other proposals beyond the assault weapons ban. For example, Gavin Newsom, California's governor, he's proposing what he's calling the 28th Amendment, which would include things along the lines of universal background checks, a reasonable waiting period before purchasing a firearm, and raising the age to buy a firearm from 18 to 21, and also banning civilian purchases for assault weapons. Could you see yourself supporting those types of measures as well?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I support anything that that would make our world safer. But obviously, the big issue, because of all the mass shootings, is assault weapons.
And at
I
this
mean,
point,
nobody's pulled a mass shooting with a 38 caliber revolver. All the mass shootings have been with assault weapons, mostly by young white men. So.
And at this point in time, it is a GOP-led House. And say, for example, even if it flips in 2024 back to blue, there's a chance the Senate will flip back to red based on the advantage that the GOP has on that map. So what could be done in the meantime if, say, for example, the Democrats don't get a trifecta?
Well, state by state, could support assault weapons bans. Some of the states already have. So if you did it state by state, it would make a difference.
Moving on to another top issue that is very present in this primary, which is the topic of reproductive rights. Do you consider yourself pro-life or pro-choice?
Well, let me qualify that. Personally, I am pro-life. In Cuba, there are 320. I do mission trips to Cuba. In Cuba, there are 320 homes for unwed mothers. I have financially supported one for 11 years. We call it Casa Cosecha, Harvest House. In 11 years, 300 young girls have come there, stayed there, and had their children. Now, with respect to abortion and the issue in the United States, I believe that the government has no business being involved in medical decisions made by women and by men. Women and men should have the right to make their own medical decisions with their doctors.
Sticking with your stance being personally pro-life, but also, willing to vote, I guess, on the pro-choice side, there's a chance that may hurt you in this primary. I kind of get flashbacks to last year where there were candidates who were either personally pro-life or not unapologetically pro-choice, and they suffered at the ballot box. And as you know, in primaries, they typically get the most partisan voters in that party. Are there any concerns that being personally pro-life could affect you in the primary?
You know what? I think that in fact, I know numerous doctors, numerous OBGYNs who, work and have performed and worked in Planned Parenthood clinics, and they personally are pro-life. Personal pro-life means that I would not, for myself or for my, a spouse or a partner or family member, and have a procedure done. But I believe that, every individual has the right to make their own decision.
So in Congress, if there's a vote to codify Roe on the federal level, how would you vote on that?
I would vote in favor.
Alongside codifying Roe, some Democrats want to take it further and repeal the Hyde Amendment. Where do you stand on that?
Well, the Hyde Amendment is, it basically, if you codify Roe, then the Hyde Amendment in effect will be null and void.
But in terms of a vote, how would you vote on whether to repeal it or not?
Oh, I would vote to repeal the Hyde Amendment.
Another big topic that has been talked about in a lot of that I've talked about in a lot of interviews with the candidates seeking the seat is term limits for members of Congress, especially since our last two Congress people served for quite some time. Where do you stand on term limits?
6 terms for the House, 12 years, 3 terms for the Senate, 18 years, and that they would be in a staggered so that you weren't, turning the entire, body over, in any particular year.
Sometimes,
so 12 for the House, 18 for the Senate.
Sometimes when I do bring up term limits, I'll often get one of two answers from those who aren't in favor of it. One, that it empowers lobbyists because it gets rid of institutional knowledge, or the other where they insist that elections are term limits. What comes to mind when you hear those types of arguments?
It's people are looking for job security. I mean, let's face it, a job in Congress is very secure. The re-election rate is 95%. You don't do work a whole lot of days out of the year. You have a lot of time off. You get a fantastic salary, $174,000 a year, and then eventually a pension. So I think that's what's probably in the back of a lot of people's minds. I mean, let's go back 30 years ago. I mean, being in Congress, you had to be very knowledgeable of things. But in this day and age, with the internet and social media and everything else, I mean, the average citizen is aware of what's going on in Congress. So the average citizen could walk onto the floor of Congress and probably understand what's going on and vote if they're keeping abreast of current events.
Some politicians who are very pro term limits, sometimes they'll hold themselves to those term limits. For example, Pat Toomey from Pennsylvania, who was a senator, he promised to only do 2 terms. After his second term, he didn't run for re-election. So if you're elected, would you hold yourself to that 12-year term limit?
Absolutely. I'm 66 years old. In 12 years, if I make it there, I'll be 78. So I'll be ready to pack it in.
I have
possibly even sooner.
I have a couple of lightning round questions I want to ask you. These are shorter form, 1 to 2 sentences at the most. If elected to Congress, what's one committee that you want to serve on?
The Foreign Relations Committee, replacing Congressman Cicilline, because of my activities in Cuba, my research, the books I've written about Cuba. They've been getting the raw end of the stick with this embargo for over 60 years. So I want to work at eliminating that.
Are you in favor of or opposed to statehood for Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico?
Puerto Rico, I helped American Airlines start up their hub down there. I have many friends in Puerto Rico. I would support statehood for both Puerto Rico and as well as the District of Columbia.
Do you support or oppose adding more Supreme Court justices to the Supreme Court?
I support it.
And lastly, for the lightning round section, banning members of Congress from trading stocks. Do you support or oppose that?
I support it.
My final question, this isn't lightning round. It's on the non-political side of things. I like to ask this at the end to keep tradition. In your opinion, what do you think Rhode Island is best known for?
I think I said organized crime and political crime. Raymond Patriarca and Buddy Cianci.
Yeah, that'll do it. That's a big one. I actually, when you were telling me that off camera, I had a family member one time go to Florida, like right as Plunder Dome was happening, and that was the first thing someone brought up when he said he was from Providence.
Oh, sure. Well, Buddy was a regular on the Today Show with Matt Lauer, because Matt Lauer started his career in Providence. They were buddies. So, but he was buddies with Buddy. And so, it's just, we were known. Hey, in Texas, I was living in Texas. People would say, "Oh boy, what's going on back there up in your home state?"
Yeah, it's definitely one of those national stories that, it's probably going to stick with us for quite a while. That's all the questions I had, Paul. I want to thank you so much for giving me your time for this interview. It's been a pleasure to have you on.
Likewise.
Thank you for watching this episode of Ray-ality TV. If you want to see future episodes as soon as they're posted on this channel, please click the subscribe button down below and the post notification bell icon to the right of it. I'm Raymond Bakari, and I'll see you next time.